it should be a significant value. And thankfully, we were blessed with an outstanding, caring, and compassionate jury. And they did. They found that the non-economic damages were about $15 million. The last case we tried was a products liability case against a manufacturer of a skid steer, a major manufacturer. In that case, we had an absolutely wonderful client who was riding on the skid steer, which was not recommended by the manufacturer. And he was injured when the lift arms were lifted up, when him and a couple of other boys had to cross a ravine. So there were several elements to the case, and the first is liability, and that's the fault of the product manufacturer for failing to warn about this particular hazard. I'm going to focus on what we call the damages part of the case, and that is equating some dollar value to the injuries and the damages and the mental and emotional impact that this accident had on our client. So our client was paralyzed. Absolutely wonderful young man. He was 16 at the time of the accident. And my job and Jesse's job was to convey to the jury how it is that this kind of catastrophic loss could ever amount to any amount of money. Because one of the first things we acknowledged to the jury is there's no amount of money that would ever undo this. And what was lost by our client was worth more than anything. It was priceless. But what the law says is we have to equate some amount of money to try to compensate him for what he's been through. Not to undo what's happened, not to magically, immediately fix him, but at least compensate him for what he's been through, the best that the law allows, and that's in the form of money. So that was a big part of our arguments to the jury and explaining to them this concept that money is a tool and it can be very helpful even though it's not magic and it's never going to undo what happened. So what we really focused on was a couple of different elements of the damages. The medical expenses that he's incurred in the case, which was about half $500,000 over the course of 10 years. The expected future medical expenses that he would have to incur because of his injuries and his paralysis. And then what we call pain, suffering, and mental anguish. And we really focused on the biggest element of the case, and that's the pain, suffering, and mental anguish, and explaining how this has affected him based on what his doctors say, how this will affect him in the future with respect to what he can do and how it affects his quality of life. So we focused mostly on pain, suffering, and mental anguish because we knew that's what the jury needed to hear about in order for them to make a decision to find a just verdict. And what I explained to the jury in closing argument was that with things in life that are priceless, there are times when we do have to put a dollar value to those, even though they're priceless. And I gave an example of a very famous painting. It was actually Leonardo da Vinci's last painting. And that painting sold at auction for $450 million. And the reason was it was considered to be priceless. It was made by a master. It was, it was painted in a certain style. It was revered as, very, very fine art, and it was done very well. But again, even though it's considered priceless, when it was time to sell that, it sold for a very high value. And I also used the example of Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback. His 10-year contract extension was $450.2 million. And everybody would agree his abilities, his God-given gifts, his ability to lead and be an excellent quarterback and throw the ball and run the ball and bounce back from injury, his tenacity, all those things are priceless. But if we had to put a number to those, it would be a significant number. So that was part of our arguments to the jury to help them understand that the law does provide a remedy. It's the best remedy. And if we have to put a number on it, if we have to put a value, which is what the jury's job was to do, it should be a significant value. And thankfully, we were blessed with an outstanding, caring, and compassionate jury. And they did. They found that the non-economic damages were about $15 million. In addition to the medical expenses in the past and in the future, that came to, after the reduction for the liability, came to a jury verdict of about $11.1 million, which was incredibly helpful for our client.